Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, brought to you by guitar-Zoom.com. If you want to improve your guitar playing, keep listening. If you want to improve even faster, go to guitar-Zoom.com, where you'll find all of Steve's premium courses, masterclasses, and memberships that'll help you quickly and easily improve your playing. Now here's your host, Steve Stine.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast. I am here with a good friend of mine by the name of Brett Ecklund. If you don't know who Brett is, Brett has done a whole bunch of different things out there in terms of making music, and he's got a really cool book that we're going to talk about, and he's been teaching for a really long time as well. So I thought it'd be fun to get Brett on, and we would just talk about life, talk about what it's like to be a guitar player and guitar teacher and all of those sorts of things.
So Paul Lydell, my friend Paul gave me a gig that he didn't have time for, which was teaching at the University of Texas, teaching a 6-week course. And everything, and I know that you know this, is that you can never be good at anything you do the first time. It's impossible. So every time you say yes, people often say no because they're like, I don't know what to do. I'd never done that, right? So, and you'll never know how to do it if you don't try it, right? So I was like, I would always just say yes, and then I would just be trial by fire. So again, as a dropout, high school dropout, I was teaching high school classes, and then now I'm teaching college courses. And I went in, and that class was 30 people, and we had people who didn't know how to fret a note, and we had people who could sweep arpeggios. So it was like a wide... So I went in and just handed out, I got up and shredded and played a bunch of crazy stuff and handed out sheets saying, here's some badass licks for all you people who know what you're doing. And now let me focus on the people who don't know what they're doing. So I kind of did that. Then what happened after that was I went to Hollywood. That was after Texas, moved to California, fulfilled all my teenage dreams of playing the Sunset Strip, the Whiskey, the Viper Room, and all of that. And I had mentioned how my wife told me to start at the top. So we got an A-list club booker or whatever. And like everything in my life, what happened then was there was a certain point where I was playing the Key Club with, I think it was me and it was Brett Ecklund. I was playing instrumentals at that point, like Satriani, Steve Vai stuff. And it was me and Nuff's Enough, Pretty Boy Floyd, Bullet Boys. I can't remember who else was on the bill. But we were sitting backstage, me and my drummer, who came out from Kansas City and was with me because we were fulfilling our dreams together. You just get that off the list so we can move forward in life. So we're not sitting at the kitchen table in Stanley, Kansas, talking about being rock stars for the rest of our lives. So we were sitting backstage and we looked at each other, and here's the Sunset Strip, cars are going by, and we're sitting with the Bullet Boys and stuff. And I was like, dude, we did it. Now we're a Hollywood band playing on the Sunset Strip. And then at that moment, I was like, okay, I'm done. Because I don't need to play amphitheaters. I'd done it. I don't need to be a Sunset Strip guy. I'd done it. I mean, I just felt like I didn't want to get stuck in any kind of cycle doing the same thing over and over. So at a certain point, I decided I'm going to play jazz. And I'm going to switch it up because my passion, my rock had turned into fusion. It was like my instrumental rock got more and more complex theoretically. And it just basically became fusion. And then I was like, it sounds a whole lot better if I just turn off the distortion. You know what I mean? So I decided to play jazz. And as soon as I made that decision, this is one of those things where it's like the stars align. The rock had run its course. And I still love rock and I still play rock or whatever. I teach it. But so then I decided to play jazz and I was going to do Joe Pass style because I was working on a lot of chord melody stuff. And I wanted to force myself into it. It's that whole trial by fire thing. Go in and force yourself to on-the-job training, right? And I had a buddy who I'd just recently met named Tommy Benson, and he said, I'll do it with you. And I said, okay, because now I don't have to do chord melody. I can just solo over the changes and work on that, learning how to play over the changes, So he joined me, and we had been playing jazz gigs for probably maybe just a few months. Really, we probably only played maybe 8 or 10 gigs. And then an opportunity came, a radio station started in Laguna Beach. It was an FM station, KXFM. It's called KXFM now, but they were basically asking community members if they wanted to do radio shows. Because Laguna Beach actually doesn't get radio signals from anywhere because they're a big cliff. Or, you got the ocean on one side and like a mountain on the other. So they're isolated. So it was a brilliant idea of young entrepreneur, Tyler Russell, who built a radio station. So that would be Laguna's Radio. Anyway, my friend Tommy went in there and they're like, oh, we don't have any more slots. And he said, well, I want to do a jazz show. And Tyler's dad was there. And he goes, I love jazz. You don't have a jazz show. Get these guys to do this jazz show. So we called it Jazz Quest because what it was two rockers who were learning about jazz on the air. So I'd read like 200 biographies on jazz musicians and I was studying the music. So that was what the show became about, is musicology, the history of jazz and how it works. And then next thing you know, we're interviewing Alex Skolnick because he was kind of a rock guy who played jazz. And we started making friends with some of these people and some iconic jazzers, and had a jam with some people on air, which was cool. Jessie Green, who plays violin, she played violin with the Foo Fighters at the Wembley when they played with Zeppelin. I mean, how cool a gig is that? And she also played Rhiannon with Stevie Nicks on The Tonight Show. Then I immersed myself in a new level of, I don't know what you would call it, peers or just connections, right? And if I may, I'll just go on to the next turning point, which was me, for whatever reason, at a certain point in my life, during all of that, I decided that when I was studying music, that I must learn how to play Stravinsky on guitar, right? I couldn't find it anywhere. Nobody had done it, really. So I found a reduction for two pianos that Stravinsky had prepared for him and his son to play The Rite of Spring, right? And I took that two piano reduction and I reduced it for one guitar. And I made a little booklet out of it. And it changed my life in the sense that I had a great awakening about networking. And that is this, is that when people meet somebody famous or in the industry or someone that could give them a leg up, then the first thing they're compelled to do is ask for a favor. And who wants to meet somebody and the very first thing they do is ask you for something? You know what I mean? Even if it's an autograph or a picture. So I was like, so now I have what I call proof of purpose, all done because of passion. I didn't do the Stravinsky book for any reason except for that I had to do it. I felt compelled to do it. And I actually, at NAMM one year, I showed it to Yuli John Roth, and he went through the whole book and helped me edit it. So it was edited. I got a ghost editor, Yuli John Roth. So anyway, that book became what I refer to as proof of purpose. And I realized the difference between confidence and arrogance is proof of purpose, because you shouldn't have to, I just couldn't sell myself. I couldn't come up to people I didn't know and tell them anything about anything I'd ever done, because I'm just not that person. I'm from the Midwest, you know what I mean? Like, you got a shirt on that says stay humble or be humbled. I was always humble. I didn't want to drop names and brag or any of that. I just felt terribly, because again, I was just about music. I was wanting to draw people in and not project myself. So the book became my proof of purpose, and it enabled me to meet people for the first time and just hand them the book as a gift. Hi, it's nice to meet you. May I give you this gift? And then they automatically had some idea of my level of musicianship, right? And this leads to an interesting radio story, is that the book got into the hands of Carl St. Clair, who's a world-class symphony conductor, right? And he was fascinated by it and decided to come on our radio show. And I prepared a Stravinsky piece, not from that book, a different Stravinsky piece for his visit, because Tommy and I played live on the air on every show. So we did Stravinsky. It was the 100th anniversary of Rite of Spring and all this stuff. And I worked up a couple of jazz arrangements, because it's Jazz Quest, of a couple of Stravinsky pieces. So I got to tell you, when we're talking about pressure and trial by fire and doing things for the first time, so here I am in this little tiny room with me and Tommy with our guitars, and sitting like 2-3 feet in front of my face is Carl St. Clair, who's a world-class symphony conductor. And I'm playing Stravinsky, which is some of the hardest possible music to play, live on the radio. So it was like all of those things, you know what I mean? That's a pressure, it could be a pressure cooker. But what happened was, again, I'm able to just instantly go to the source. The music's the most important thing here. Let's focus on that. Because if the music is good, the whole experience is going to work itself out. And the other thing is that Carl, because he makes a living, why he's a great conductor is because he has this aura his job is to bring out the best in musicians. So he can't be confrontational in any way. His whole job is to nurture the band and to bring a performance out. And I felt it. I felt this energy. And then he invited me and Tommy to the 100th anniversary of the Pacific Symphony's Rite of Spring. So you see how all these things just like lead to these weird. And then I met Tony Palmer, who he directed Frank Zappa's 200 Motels. So he's like a filmmaker, right? And he had done a Stravinsky documentary. And when he shook my hand, he said, just know that you're shaking the hand that shook Stravinsky's hand, which was, and I mean, so here's this metal kid, you know what I mean, who's like suddenly in this world. And he said that when Stravinsky's only request about the documentary is that Tony would introduce Stravinsky to John Lennon. So he goes, imagine that meeting. I'm in a room with Igor Stravinsky and John Lennon, you know what I mean? So now here's the world that I'm in now, you know, with these types of people. And then I would say a point that I definitely want to get to, and maybe is one of the most important elements of my musical life, is that the retail store where I was teaching, Max Bennett walked in one day. And Max Bennett is a legendary bassist who played with, he was 80 years old when I met him, right? So he had toured and played with Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, I mean, all the greats like that. And then went on in the 60s, he was on Joni Mitchell's most famous albums, LA Express, and played with Frank Sinatra. He was on Hot Rats album. And then there's more people he played with than he didn't play with. He made 440 movie soundtrack recordings and television shows, Starsky and Hutch and Love Boat and all that, you know what I mean? But when I handed him that book, again, The Proof of Purpose, and he was a Stravinsky fan as well. So he was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And then whenever he would, and because of my jazz radio time, like I said, one domino leads to the next. Whenever he would talk about his history in jazz, I'm the only one in the store who knew what he was talking about. And I could, oh, you mean whoever that played Shelly Manne, the drummer, whatever. So we instantly connected, and he decided to be my mentor, and it was going to be an apprenticeship. He wanted to pass the torch to me. He felt like I was the one person that could carry the torch, right? But that required me, and this is where the book comes in, is that when I was going to begin my studies with Max, I was like, I'm going to take all of the rock, all of the sweeping and the tapping and the string skipping and the exotic scales and everything that I've been doing. I'm going to take all that rock and I'm going to document it. So that way I don't have to remember it, forget it. And I put it all in this book called Guitar Memoir, right? And that was like closing the chapter on my rock thing and then entering into my relationship with Max as an empty vessel and knowing that whatever he said was the truth and that I was just going to have blind faith in the man because he knew what he was doing, and he was a taskmaster. I mean, he was like, don't tell people you studied with me if you're going to play that shit. You know what I mean? He was hardcore. And I would say we spent the majority of the 8 years working on syncopated sixteenths. He was like, when you're in the studio, he goes, imagine you're in the studio and you're doing a movie soundtrack or something, and there's a crew. There's a bunch of people running around doing stuff, and then you have the producers, and then you have the musicians in the band, and then maybe you have a choir and an orchestra. There's maybe 200 people in the room. And he goes, you only ever get one try. Because he goes, imagine if you're the guy that drops the ball. You mess up the take. That's your last gig ever. Your career is over. So he was like, that's how important it is to get it right, to know that music, be able to play that music perfectly and never make a single mistake, because that's your whole career depends on it. The other thing with the syncopated sixteenths, one time I was sitting there, I was just sweating and I was nervous, and because he was just really just on me, you know what I mean? And it was some sort of like, and I felt like I was right on it a few times, you know what I mean? And he's like, no. And he goes, I'm only getting on you because I have faith that you can do it. But check this out. And he played something that he had played with a big band. And he said, there's 18-piece band here. Imagine if 17 guys come and kill it and you don't. And you're the one guy who doesn't kill it, who's not on it. And he goes, then you get a nickname that you're going to live with for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? You're going to be so Max I just started over. I mean, and I was in my 40s or whatever. So I was like starting over from the very beginning with Max. If you don't mind me digressing constantly, it reminds me of other things. There was another pivotal event in my life, and that was all around the same time with this jazz stuff. On Tommy and I, we had only gigged maybe, I don't know, not very many, maybe 6 months we were into the jazz thing. We were still figuring our way out. And we were playing a gig in San Juan Capistrano at this little wine bar. I mean, it was small. It was a little tiny basement bar. And we're playing there. I'll never forget, we were playing Come Fly With Me. Dun, 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 right? And I'm playing, and all of a sudden, I'm going dun, 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 dun. My hands like Back to the Future. You know what I mean? My hands started like, and then Tommy looks at me like, dude, you never screw that up. And then he saw out of the corner of his eye, Alan Holdsworth had walked in. So then Tommy's playing rhythm, jing, 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 jing. You know what I mean? He's like, so Alan walks up and he's like, I guess you guys know who I am. You know what I mean? It's evident. So we had talked for a minute, and then he sat like, again, just like Carl St. Clair, talk about a trial by fire. He sat like, I could have picked up his beer and drank out of him. I mean, he's right there in front of my face. And he sat through a 40-minute set and watched us play. All I remember, I think maybe I played it, whatever my muscle memory was playing the guitar, because my mind was racing and sweat was pouring, literally pouring down. And he stayed for the 40 minutes. And then afterwards, we had a break, 20-minute break. He stayed for the whole break. And he just went on and on about how wonderful we were and what great players we were, and gave me a bunch of hugs. And I just felt like that was such a pivotal moment, because that's where I felt validated. Because, you know, you start off, you want to play for your friends and your family, and then your peers, fellow high school students or whoever at the club. Then you're playing for your fellow musicians. You want to be recognized as a good player by other players. Then for me, I wanted to be acknowledged by my superiors. And I felt like, and I still, because we're all, Eric Clapton calls us egomaniacs with insecurity issues or whatever, you know what I mean? We never feel good enough. And I figured, well, if Alan Holdsworth thinks that I'm pretty good, then I must be pretty good. You know what I mean? And I'll just run with, I was finally able to let that go, like be okay with thinking of myself as being pretty good. Because again, that whole humble thing, I never really wanted to project that. I saw so much of that in Hollywood. People walk around like they were just the king of the world and they couldn't play. You know what I mean? So yeah, that just being around those people. And went in the studio with Max to do some recording. He brought in, Max had won 19 Grammys, and he brings in his A team. So I got the drummer from Stevie Wonder, and I got the guitar player Mike Miller, who played with the Yellow Jackets, and Bette Midler, and all these people. And he was currently on tour with Boz Scaggs when he was coming in and doing the sessions with me. And so these were songs that I wrote. So I was essentially, it was my record. I was in charge of the session, but I wasn't in charge of the session at all, because these guys came in. And the first thing Mike Miller did, the guitar player, is I put the sheet in front of him, because I had to prepare the sheets, and it just had the chords and it just had the melody that I would be adding on guitar later. And so that way they could play off the melody if they wanted to. And Mike Miller set that sheet up on the stand. He looked at the tempo, and he sight read and played a chord melody version of the song, just like that. And I don't know if you've ever done chord melody, but it's hard to improvise, you know what I mean? And that session, I was sitting there with those headphones on and hearing those great musicians. It was like, these my songs, because I can't even explain it. I'd been playing for 43 years, and these guys, granted, they're older, but their level of musicianship was so high. And I just felt so small, you know what I mean? But I was fortunate enough, obviously, then when I laid my parts on, then the album's going to sound great because it's got all these great players on it. And my wife, the first thing she said when she heard it was, well, what are you going to do now? Because that's the best record you're ever going to make. So there you see, this long line of my story is just experiencing something and then moving on to another experience and just doing it, allowing the music. I'm following the music and just leading wherever it serendipitously takes me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's next. And now I haven't been doing as much recording and just focusing on teaching primarily. But I don't know. I'd be happy to just teach for the rest of my life. I love being a mentor and using music as a metaphor for life lessons, for personal growth, and being a positive role model who leads by example for people. But who knows? Maybe something else. I don't know, because it's been such a wide variety of things that I decide to play jazz, and then I have a radio show, and then I do the Stravinsky, and then I meet Carl St. Clair, and it's all triggered by just a passion for playing. And I always hear music as tones, you know what I mean? I do play along videos on my YouTube channel, playing along with saxophone solos and just solos that aren't guitar solos, because I don't want to sound like the other guitar players, you know what I mean? And so music, I'm always just hearing, and you know what I think kind of sucks for guitar players? If you think about playing fast, if someone plays fast on piano, they're a virtuoso, right? And think about an orchestra playing fast on violin. Every instrument gets respect, but as soon as you pick on a distortion box and you play fast, then you're a wanker. It's like that box turns you virtuoso guitar to wanker town. You know what I mean? And it's like, why is that? And it's just a tone.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, and the other thing is that what I found too is that if people were really to be honest, half the people that are bashing it because they can't do it. And that's the thing. With speed, I mean, listen, it's music. There's a technical aspect to it. If you're moving from a whole note to a half note to a quarter note to an eighth note to a 16th, 32nd to a 64th, there's an element of professionalism in being able to do something faster than if you go from a 16th from an eighth or a 32nd from a 16th, regardless of the instrument that you play, whether it's drums, whether it's violin, whether it's guitar. And in order to get that, to move to that next level from an eighth to a 16th, from a 16th to a 32nd, whatever it might be, requires so much more time and effort to be able to dial that in. Now, there's no doubt as guitar players, sometimes we overuse that element, and that's a real thing. But to be able to do it has to be a badge of honor in some capacity because you spent so much time to develop that element. So it's way easier for someone to say, oh, there's so much more soul in one note than there is in 1,000 notes. Maybe. But for me, what I've always tried to explain to people is a good solo is like a good story. It has to have an ebb and flow. It has to have dynamics to it. And if you're only playing half notes the entire solo, because that's as fast as you can go, because one note is better than 1,000 notes, your solo is not going to be any better. So there has to be something in between there. And so that's always been my argument with that whole thing is there's no doubt that we can overuse that technique, but thank God we have the availability of being able to use the technique. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and you're getting motivated to take your guitar playing to the next level. Please do me a favor and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It'll help the show grow and reach more rock stars like you who want to improve their guitar playing. Also, I'd love to know what parts of the episode you liked, as well as what you learned. So please share this podcast and tag us at guitarzoom.com on your social post. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
Max, when I did my record, I would bring, after I did a solo, I'd send it to him, and he'd be going, da 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 da, whatever it was. And he had me cut out all of the fast runs. I mean, for my ego, here I'm recording with Grammy winners. This is my moment. But again, I just gave myself completely. I trusted Max completely. So then it's da 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 da, da 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 da. You know what I mean? So it's like missing the big run or the sweep or whatever it is. He just swept it right out of the song. I have this theory that I often, we'll see what you think about it, because I always run it by my students. I talk about the mind, body, and spirit, right? And to me, there's three primary musics. There's jazz, classical, and blues. And almost every other music is some combination of those things. And you could take, obviously, like Aerosmith, or there's blues in that, and Metallica, they play well with a symphony because their music sounds like classical music. Any kind of and it's so I think of jazz as being music of the mind. You have to know how all of the moving pieces work. You have to know every note, chord, scale, substitution, extension, extension. You got to know how all of music works so that you can participate and improvise and say what you want to say with confidence. And then you have body. So you have mind, jazz, body is classical. Classical is technique. And you have to be able to read well. And you have to have the technical ability to play whatever is written on the page. So if it's you got to be able to read that in real time because, again, like Max would always say, you've got 50 other people depending on you to play that perfectly. You know what I mean? So that's more of a body thing. And then blues is the spirit, where you don't have to have. So classical musicians don't necessarily need to know music theory to be able to do their job. You know what I mean? And a blues player doesn't need to know much theory or technique and can still get by. So you have these, but to me, the trifecta is to know all of music and how it works, all the ins and outs of every element as much as you can, all the theory, and to have the technical proficiency to play anything that you want to play and do it with feeling. And to me, that is the ultimate. Now, and it's okay for anyone to go down any one road or be a field player or whatever, you know what I mean? But they're not going to be able to play over changes. They're not going to be able to play all the things you are. That's what they always say. The field players, yeah, put a jazz song in front of them. If you put anything that's not diatonic in front of them and they're lost. And a good example is, I would say, as far as rock, just as a musician in general, Eddie Van Halen. If you think about Eddie Van Halen, his dad was a jazz clarinetist. He grew up his whole life listening to jazz. His dad played jazz, and even Al sat in and played jazz with his dad or whatever. Then he studied classical music in college so well that he was able to win competitions on the piano playing classical music. And then he fell in love with Eric Clapton, who was playing rock blues. And you can hear the trifecta in Eddie's playing. You can hear the jazz, you can hear the classical, and you can hear the blues. It's all there. And I always say that's why I don't play Eddie Van Halen on guitar. I mean, I did when I was a kid. That's how I learned how to play. I mean, but anymore, it's like sacred ground. When someone plays Eddie Van Halen, even the best of the best, they're nowhere near Eddie Van Halen. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say it's insulting or whatever, but it's like they're not even close because he just had something that was so ingrained in him. You know what I mean? All of those elements, like I said, of the, and you know, and he always says, I never took a guitar lesson. Yeah, but he knows all of music theory. I mean, he knows how it works. So that's what I always strove. That's always been my goal, is to have the knowledge, capability, and the ability to access emotion within myself. And I always tell people to think about something you feel strongly about. Think about an emotion. And when you play a note, it's going to sound like, it's going to color the way you perceive the notes. And so it's so much like meditation to me, what practice is, because you're basically got to shut down that critical part of your mind and just knock out some repetitions. I always say people, it's like chiseling a statue out of marble. Every time you play through it, bing, that's one hit of the hammer. Bing, there's another hit of the hammer. And so maybe it'll take you 1,000 times. So I always just set a clock for 30 minutes or whatever, and I just knock out as many repetitions as I can without using my mind at all, except for to make disciplined repetitions to where you make little changes or whatever. But you've got to get to that place to where the critical mind is never part of the equation when you're making music. It should never really be part of the equation. As far as I'm concerned, you want to be one with the music. The music's the important thing. The critical mind is going off on all kinds of weird little journeys. You know what I mean? Why you suck and why you'll never be able to do it. We've all been through it, but that was another big thing, is to learn how to practice. And I always tell people, they're like, well, I didn't have time to practice. And I'm like, well, think of it like a meditation class or a yoga class, something. If you play music 30 minutes a week, that is good for you. You know what I mean? You don't have to play every day, all day long. You can play just 30 minutes a week and you're going to get better. It's just it's the experience of playing it, and you're going to miss out on the experience of playing if you're thinking other things, especially if you're thinking negative things.
That's right. Wow, that's awesome, brother. That was really good. It's fun to hear you talk about this stuff. There's so many things. It's just great.
Well, I'm trying to just spill it out there.
No, it's awesome. Okay, so let's say somebody wants to get a hold of you for a project, or maybe they want to get a hold of you for lessons or whatever it might be. What's the best way to get a hold of you, man?
Probably my website, bretteklund.com. That's BRETTECKLUND.com. I mean, my phone number's on there, my email, some information. Of course, I have all the YouTube channel and Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. But my website is my primary, what I would like for to be my primary way to connect. You can definitely, like I said, my phone number's on there, and anyone can feel free to text me and set up some lessons. I really do. There are several elements of online lessons that I think are more beneficial than face-to-face lessons as well that I didn't expect. And one of them is tuning. I used to tune because you got 30 minutes in a room with someone. You want to get their guitar in tune. You don't want to spend 15 minutes of them struggling through a tuning. And then, so they have to learn how to tune their guitar. You know what I mean? Like without tuning it. And then also schedule my lessons with spaces in between so we can run over. There's a lot more leeway, and I focus on different students' needs throughout the week. And then I cross some of those lessons over to other students so that they're not just playing. That's what happens when people teach themselves is they become narrow-minded. They go down like this one-way street, whether intentionally or unintentionally, especially with internet algorithms. And so the way you grow is by learning things that you wouldn't normally learn. And that's, for me, my students' requests. My practice schedule is whatever my students want to learn, and I'm excited to learn. If it's the Kirby Dream Land video game theme on ukulele, then that's something I would have never picked in a million years. And there's no tab for it. So I got to use my ear and and even if I've spent an hour on it for a 30-minute lesson, and then I teach the kid and he's like, I don't know, if it looks kind of hard, but still so my students are preparing the things that I practice, you know what I mean? And I do the same for them. I cross-reference something that one student picked and pass it on to another, saying, open your ears and listen to music as good and bad and not by genre specific. There's just one music, and it's just divided into all of these genres based on tones and instrumentation, right?
Very cool, brother. It was nice hanging out with you.
I didn't let you talk very much, but I just had my coffee, so I'm just like all da, 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 da.
No, that was awesome. It was awesome to hear all of it. It's always good to inspire people and to get people think about things differently. And I think you did a great job with that. So I appreciate your time. And what do you got planned for the weekend?
I really haven't thought about it. I've got some kind of heavy life issues happening right now. I'm having half of my thyroid surgically removed soon, so consuming my thoughts, and
Sure, of course.
and my mother is deathly ill, and so I'm always very transparent about things that are happening in my life as well, because I want people to feel comfortable to speak with me, to be able to, it's always good to talk to people when things are troubling you and not keep it inside. And so, and I'm raising 3 grandchildren. The part of the story that I didn't even tell is that I had twin sons. I mentioned that. But then when I met my wife 25 years ago, she had 3 little girls. We raised 5 kids through all those music stories I was telling you. We raised 5 kids, and now we're raising 3 grandchildren. So I never, from the time I was 18 and now I'm 54, I have never not been raising young children. So when you ask about my weekend, I've got some things that I've got to work out, personal issues, but
Sure.
pretty much just kids stuff, teaching and kids stuff, because they run my life. I'm happy to be there. I'm happy to let them do it, especially the little girls. I know you got a couple little girls or just one?
Well, I've got 120. She'll be 21 next month. And then I have a 13-year-old that will be 14 very soon.
But you raise little girls, and dad does whatever he's told, for sucker for a little girl, I always say I didn't know what love was until and I had sons, and I love my sons, you know what I mean? But there was something about that little girl, just when I was holding her in my arms and when she was a little baby, like, now I know what love is, you know what I mean? I would do anything for this girl. I would do anything. So that's kind of where my priorities lie.
Yep. I get it, man. All right. Well, you have a wonderful weekend and take care of yourself. Obviously, let me know. We'll chat, obviously, in the near future, too. But everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us. And make sure that you look up BrettEcklund.com. And I do believe we put links on the podcast things as well, so you can look it up on there as well. So everybody, thank you so much. Thank you, Brett, for your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Steve.
Awesome, brother. All right. And everybody, take care out there. Stay positive. Keep practicing, and I'll talk to you soon. If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to learn guitar even faster, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button to get access to courses that are right for your interest and skill level. Again, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button.